That night, upon the summit of Mount Sinai, amid the rolling thunder and the blazing radiance of the divine presence, an angel appeared in resplendent light and entrusted Moses with a revelation never recorded in the canonical scriptures. It was not merely the proclamation of the Ten Commandments, but the unveiling of a far more ancient mystery, the hidden architecture of creation itself, spoken from a time before the universe beheld its first dawn, when celestial beings still walked in nearness to mankind. The angel declared, "Before the sun was kindled, and before the moon was appointed her course, I was commissioned to inscribe every moment fashioned by the hand of the Almighty. Every age has its measure. Every soul has its appointed place within the great chronicle of eternity." He disclosed to Moses truths both wondrous and sobering: how God formed the heavens and the earth in deliberate order, how humanity, though beloved, would wander into rebellion, and how sacred covenants between the Lord and the children of Israel had already been woven into the fabric of time. These revelations would later be preserved in what came to be known as the Book of Jubilees, a sacred chronicle revered by some, yet ultimately set aside and declared forbidden. For it spoke too plainly of heavenly mysteries, of the structure of creation, and of the divine governance of history itself. Over centuries, it was removed from the biblical canon and survived only in ancient manuscripts, safeguarded in Ethiopia, quietly enduring while the world forgot its voice. Yet imagine this night as the world grows still, when the noise of nations fades and the human heart is ready to listen. The sealed pages of that ancient book are opened once more. We return to the mountain. We return to the angelic voice that first revealed the hidden order of time. At that hour in history, Israel had endured more than 4 centuries of bondage in Egypt. They labored beneath the desert sun, shaping bricks for cities not their own, their backs scarred by whips, their spirits weighed down by despair. Day after day they cried out to the God of their fathers. And in the fullness of time, a deliverer arose, Moses raised in Pharaoh's palace, yet called by a fire far greater than royal privilege. When the appointed moment came, God revealed himself in a bush that burned without being consumed and commanded, "Go, lead my people out of Egypt." What followed shook an empire. The Nile ran red as blood. Darkness swallowed the sky. Plagues swept through the land. And only when the firstborn of Egypt fell did Pharaoh relent and release the Israelites. They departed under cover of night, guided by moonlight and desert winds. Before them lay the vast sea. Behind them thundered the chariots of Egypt. Fear seized the camp. Mothers clutched their children. Fathers trembled. "Were we freed only to perish here?" they cried. Moses lifted his eyes heavenward. "O Lord, show me your way." And the voice of God answered upon the wind, "Raise your staff and divide the sea." In faith, Moses obeyed. Through the long night, a mighty wind roared as if heaven itself breathed upon the waters. The sea rose and parted, forming towering walls that shimmered with lightning. Between them stretched a path of dry ground, gleaming like silver beneath the storm-lit sky. Family by family the Israelites crossed. The elderly leaned upon their staffs. Children clung to their mothers. Torchlight flickered across faces once frozen in terror, now awakening to faith. The Egyptian army pursued, but their chariot wheels splintered, their horses faltered, and thunder rolled like the voice of judgment. When the last Israelite reached the far shore, Moses stretched out his hand once more. The waters collapsed in a deafening surge, and the army of Pharaoh vanished beneath the waves. Silence followed. Dawn broke. The people fell to their knees. Slaves no longer, they had become a nation chosen and delivered. Yet liberation was only the beginning. Through the wilderness they journeyed, sustained by manna from heaven and water drawn from stone. By day, a pillar of cloud led them. By night, a pillar of fire illumined their path. After 3 months, they came to the foot of Mount Sinai, a mountain crowned in storm, veiled in cloud, trembling with thunder. Moses ascended alone. Wind howled between the rocks, lightning flashed, fire descended, and within that radiant glory the angel reappeared, brilliant as flame, yet gentle as breath. "Moses," he said, "you have led the people from earthly chains. Now you must learn the order of heaven. For 40 days and 40 nights Moses remained upon the mountain. He received the tablets of the law engraved by the finger of God, but beyond the law he received the revelation of sacred time itself. From the first utterance of light, the angel explained, time was ordained. It does not wander aimlessly. It moves in sacred cycles, jubilees each lasting 49 years, 7 times 7, the number of divine completion. At the close of each jubilee, debts were forgiven, captives freed, and covenant renewed, a holy rhythm woven into creation. Before Moses' eyes, luminous circles appeared, revolving like constellations. Each represented a jubilee, each marked an era in God's redemptive design. Men believe they measure time by the rising and setting of the sun, the angel said. But time belongs to heaven. Even when humanity forgets this, it cannot escape the order established at the dawn of creation. Then the angel revealed something yet more profound. Suspended in the air appeared a crystalline book woven from light itself. Symbols shimmered upon its surface like living stars. This, said the angel, is the book of time. Every word spoken, every thought conceived, every deed performed is inscribed here. Nothing vanishes. Time is heaven's witness. Some pages radiated brilliance, the record of compassion, faith, and mercy. Others were dimmed by arrogance and rebellion. Man may conceal his sins from the world, the angel continued, but he cannot conceal them from eternity. Death does not conclude the story. It is but a pause between sentences. He spoke of ages yet to come, when humanity would pride itself on recording all things with machines and artificial minds. Yet no invention will capture the light or shadow of the soul. Only the book of heaven preserves the truth of every heart. And then came a final warning. When time itself reaches its appointed end, this book shall be opened. Each soul will behold its own story, not judged for what it never knew, but for what it knew and chose to ignore. Moses bowed, tears falling upon his hands. He understood that divine justice is not rooted in cruelty, but in unveiled truth, truth from which no soul can flee. The angel's voice softened as he concluded, kingdoms will rise, civilizations will flourish, but without righteousness they will crumble like dust before the wind. For time belongs to the Lord, and every age moves toward the fulfillment of his eternal design. Therefore, live as though each day were a line inscribed upon the eternal record. Let your days shine with compassion, with steadfast faith, and with reverent devotion to the Lord your God. Live in such a way that when time itself reaches its appointed conclusion, your page will not be shadowed by regret, but illuminated by mercy and by the trust you placed in the Almighty. For only goodness grants the soul its dwelling within the everlasting light. When the angel finished speaking, the sky above Mount Sinai grew still. The blazing radiance softened into the hush of night, and before Moses another vision unfolded, a world without form, where waters covered the deep and no boundary yet divided heaven from earth. The angel said, "Look now, O chosen servant. I will show you the first dawn, the foundation of time itself, the 7 sacred days of creation, and the order established before history began." The mountain dissolved from Moses' sight. There was no summit, no cloud, no thunder, only an immeasurable expanse. No day, no night, only the Eternal One, self-existent and sovereign, the source of all being. Before the world began, the angel said, there was only him, no shape, no sound, only divine will awaiting its command. Then the first day appeared. A radiant burst pierced the infinite darkness, not the light of sun or flame, but a primordial brilliance, the first breath of life. And God declared, "Let there be light." Light separated from darkness, and the distinction between shadow and illumination was born. Thus began the rhythm of existence. On the second day, the waters were divided. An expanse stretched forth, vast, majestic, and God called it heaven. From that moment, the angel explained, realms were distinguished, the earthly and the celestial, each governed by its ordained law. On the third day, dry land rose from the sea. The earth clothed itself in green grass, herbs, trees bearing fruit according to their kind. Each seed, said the angel, is a covenant of continuity, a testimony that life shall endure according to the Creator's design. On the fourth day, two great lights were appointed, the sun to rule the day, the moon to govern the night, and the stars were set like jewels across the firmament. They were given as signs for seasons, days, and years. Now, the angel said, time begins its measured course. Each orbit of the sun, each phase of the moon, is a heartbeat within the symphony the Lord composed. Moses beheld countless beings of light angels assigned to guard the balance of days and seasons. They moved with flawless harmony, ensuring that time would not falter, for if its order collapsed, creation itself would dissolve into chaos. On the fifth day, seas teemed with living creatures, and birds filled the sky with motion and song. They were blessed with the command to multiply. On the sixth day, the earth brought forth beasts of every kind. Then, in solemn grandeur, God formed man from the dust and breathed into him the breath of life. Humanity became a living soul, made in the image of God, male and female, entrusted with stewardship over creation. This, said the angel, is the summit of earthly creation. Within every human soul burns a fragment of divine light, and yet also the freedom to choose. Through that freedom, the story of mankind is written. On the seventh day, God rested not from exhaustion, but to establish sacred rhythm. He sanctified the day, setting apart stillness as holy. The seventh day, the angel declared, is the heartbeat of the cosmos. Without rest in the Creator, labor becomes emptiness, and strength becomes pride. Moses understood then that the 7 days were not merely history, they were a pattern for all existence, labor and renewal, creation and communion. The angel spoke once more. From that beginning, I was appointed to guard the cycles of time, the revolutions, the jubilees, the turning of ages. I record not the deeds of men, but the pulse of eternity, ensuring that when one cycle closes and another begins, the covenant of the Lord remains unbroken. As the vision shifted, the earth grew gentle and alive. Verdant fields stretched beneath a sky clear as first light. Rivers flowed in quiet harmony. All was perfect, untouched by sorrow or fear. In the garden called Eden, the Lord formed the first man and the first woman, Adam and Eve. They dwelt among trees heavy with fruit, beside rivers that shimmered in the morning sun. No barrier separated them from God. In the cool of the evening, he walked among them. All this is yours, the Lord said, except for the tree at the center, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. For in the day you eat of it, you shall know what is not appointed for you to bear. They lived in innocence and joy. Their labor was light, their fellowship unbroken. There was no shame, no fear, only trust. Yet freedom carried within it a test. One day, as Eve wandered near a quiet stream, a voice arose from beneath the trees. A serpent, subtle and radiant-eyed, spoke with a whisper smooth as wind through leaves. The serpent's voice coiled through the stillness of Eden like a silken thread. Did God truly say you must not eat from any tree in the garden? Eve answered with innocence unshadowed by suspicion. We may eat from every tree except the one in the midst of the garden. God has said that if we eat of it or even touch it, we shall die. A quiet laugh slipped from the serpent's lips, subtle and persuasive. You shall not surely die, for when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened. You will understand. You will be as God, knowing good and evil. Those words entered her mind like a blade of thought, sharp, gleaming, irresistible. She lifted her gaze to the forbidden tree. Its fruit shone crimson beneath the sunlight, radiant as a jewel, fragrant and inviting. For a moment, she hesitated. Then desire stirred. Eve reached out. She plucked the fruit. She tasted it. At once, the garden seemed to exhale and fall silent. The wind stilled. The air shifted. Something unseen fractured. She turned to Adam and extended the fruit. He looked at her, at the trust in her eyes, at the fruit in her hand. For a long, heavy moment, he said nothing. Then, out of love mingled with weakness, he ate. Immediately, the light around them dimmed, not the light of the sun, but the light within. The trees still stood. The rivers still flowed, the birds still sang, yet something eternal had vanished. They looked upon one another, and for the first time in human history, felt shame. They became aware of their nakedness, and hastily sewed fig leaves together. Their hearts pounded with a new and terrible emotion, fear. That evening, as he had done before, the Lord walked in the garden in the cool of the day. "Adam, where are you?" But Adam did not answer at once. He and Eve hid among the trees like frightened children. "Why are you hiding?" the Lord asked gently. Adam's voice trembled. "I was afraid, because I am naked." "Who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree I commanded you not to eat?" Adam lowered his head. "The woman you gave me, she offered it to me, and I ate." Eve whispered, "The serpent deceived me." The Lord looked upon them not with fury alone, but with sorrow that pierced deeper than wrath. He spoke to the serpent, "You shall crawl upon your belly, and enmity shall stand between you and the woman, between your seed and hers." Then he turned to Adam and Eve. "Because you listened to another voice instead of mine, the ground will bear thorns and thistles. By the sweat of your brow you shall eat. Pain shall accompany birth, and toil shall follow your days." And so they were sent from Eden. At its gates, angels stood with flaming swords, guarding the way to the tree of life. When Adam and Eve looked back one final time, the eastern sky blazed with holy light. Within that radiance, the tree of life still stood glorious, luminous, forever beyond their reach. Then the angel said to Moses, his voice soft as desert wind, "From that moment, the age of mankind truly began. Before sin, time required no measure. But once fear and suffering entered the human heart, every hour became a step in the long journey back to God." Moses understood. Eden had not vanished. Humanity had lost the purity to remain. Thus began history, the history of sin and the history of hope. Cain and Abel, the first fracture of brotherhood. When Adam and Eve stepped beyond Eden's gates, the world was no longer gentle. The soil was hard. The wind burned against their skin. Nothing grew without labor. For the first time, they felt exhaustion, hunger, uncertainty. Their first son was born, and Adam named him Cain, given by God. He was hope embodied, a promise that life would continue despite exile. Soon after came Abel, quieter, gentler, contemplative. The brothers grew under their father's instruction. Adam taught them to till the earth and to bow their heads in gratitude. "Remember," he would say, "the harvest rises not by your strength alone, but by the mercy of God." Yet the brothers were different. Cain was strong and resolute, convinced that his own effort shaped destiny. Abel was humble, reverent, quick to thank the Lord when rain fell upon the fields. Over time, a quiet tension stirred within Cain, not hatred at first, but unease. Abel's faith felt like a mirror, reflecting something Cain did not wish to see. One day, both brought offerings before the Lord. Cain presented the fruit of the ground. Abel offered the firstborn of his flock. The smoke from Abel's altar rose steady and bright toward heaven. Cain's offering, though abundant, seemed to scatter and fade. Cain's heart tightened. The Lord spoke gently. "Why are you angry? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not, sin crouches at your door. It desires you, but you must master it." Yet pride sealed Cain's ears. Jealousy smoldered silently, like a fire beneath ash. The next morning, Abel approached with bread in his hands and kindness in his eyes. "Brother, do not be troubled. Let us pray together. The Lord will yet be pleased with you." But kindness felt unbearable. "Come with me," Cain said quietly. "Walk into the field." They went together beneath a calm sky. Abel knelt, touching the soil. "You have done well," he said. "God will bless this land." Cain said nothing. Within him churned love, envy, regret, and rage, a storm without direction. His hand closed around a stone. One blow, Abel fell. No cry pierced the air, only the soft departure of breath. The earth drank the first blood ever spilled by human hands. Cain stood frozen, staring at what he had done. He fell beside his brother, lifting him, pleading, "Abel, wake." But the silence answered him. The wind rose again, not as a whisper of peace, but as the first breath of death. Cain fled. He ran until strength failed him, yet no distance could outrun the voice of God. "Cain, where is your brother?" Trembling, Cain replied, "I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper?" And the Lord said, "Your brother's blood cries to me from the ground. The earth that has swallowed it shall no longer yield its strength to you." Thus the first fracture of humanity was sealed, not by famine or storm, but by envy unmastered. And Moses, standing upon the mountain in his vision, understood that the fall of man did not end in Eden. It continued wherever pride overruled humility, wherever resentment overcame love. For the history of mankind would be written not only in victories and kingdoms, but in the choices of the human heart. "You shall be a wanderer," the Lord declared, "restless upon the earth, bearing the weight of your own sin." Cain fell upon the ground and wept. "My punishment is greater than I can endure. Whoever finds me will kill me." Yet even in judgment, mercy remained. The Lord answered, "No one shall harm Cain. Whoever does shall be avenged sevenfold." And he placed a mark upon Cain, not as a sign of approval, but as a sign of restraint. Cain would live. He would carry the burden of what he had done. He would learn what it meant to exist beneath the shadow of his own choice. Cain departed eastward, toward a rising sun that no longer promised hope. Adam and Eve knelt beside Abel's body, their tears mingling with the soil that had drunk their son's blood. For the first time, they felt the unbearable agony of burying a child and the deeper anguish of seeing sin take root within their own lineage. The angel said to Moses, his voice like wind moving through a desolate valley, "From Cain and Abel, the world learned that jealousy strikes faster than any blade." From that first drop of blood, humanity entered an age of conflict, where brothers contend with brothers for pride, power, and the illusion of righteousness. Moses lowered his head. He understood that Cain's sin did not end in the field. It continued, generation after generation, flowing like a hidden current through the veins of mankind, until the day humanity would learn to forgive, as God once restrained vengeance. The multiplication of sin. Adam and Eve lived long after Abel's death, yet they were never the same. Whenever they looked upon the earth, they remembered the blood that had stained it. Whenever they thought of Cain, they heard again the voice of God. "Where is your brother?" They bore more sons and daughters. The earth began to fill with people, but as life multiplied, so did corruption. The story of Eden became a fading memory, then a legend, then a whisper scarcely believed. Cities rose from dust. Men claimed land and authority. Strength dominated humility. Pride replaced gratitude. Prayer grew rare, drowned beneath ambition. And heaven took notice. The angel said to Moses, "As the children of Adam multiplied, the Lord appointed watchers, angels entrusted to observe and guide mankind, to teach righteousness and preserve order." At first, they were faithful. They instructed humanity in knowledge, how to read the stars, measure the seasons, craft tools, write symbols, and build with wisdom. Under their influence, the earth flourished. But something forbidden stirred. The watchers looked upon the daughters of men, and desire awakened within them. It was the same whisper that had once spoken in Eden, beginning as curiosity, ending in rebellion. Among them rose a leader, Shemiaza, who said, "We know this is transgression. But if we act together, who shall stand against us?" Bound by a mutual oath, they descended. The heavens trembled as they fell. Thunder split the skies. The brilliance of their wings dimmed like stars extinguished at dawn. From that moment, they were no longer guardians, but the fallen. They took wives among mortals. And from these unions came a race the world had never seen, the Nephilim, giants in stature and strength. Their presence shook the earth. Their eyes burned like embers. At first, humanity revered them as divine offspring. Soon, reverence turned to terror. The giants consumed the beasts of the field. When the beasts were gone, they turned upon mankind. Villages disappeared, rivers ran red, the earth groaned beneath their violence. The fallen watchers taught humanity forbidden knowledge, how to forge weapons of war, to summon spirits, to fashion idols, to exalt vanity and bloodshed. The boundary between heaven and earth dissolved. And the Lord looked down. All flesh has corrupted its way, he declared. Creation has defiled itself. I will cleanse the earth. Judgment of the fallen. The Lord sent forth his archangels. Michael descended with a sword of flame, declaring judgment upon the rebels. Raphael was commanded to bring destruction upon the giants. Gabriel was sent to confront the violence that filled the earth. Uriel bore the decree of divine justice. The watchers were bound in the abyss until the appointed day. The giants turned upon one another in madness. The earth convulsed, mountains split, seas rose. When silence fell, their colossal forms lay buried beneath stone, while their restless spirits lingered as shadows among men. These things, the angel told Moses, were not preserved in every sacred record. For the world was not ready to know that rebellion was not born of man alone, but of those who once bore heaven's light. Moses trembled. He saw that sin was no longer merely personal, it had become woven into the very fabric of history. Enoch, witness between worlds. When the blood of the giants soaked the earth, the angel continued, only one man walked righteously before God, Enoch, seventh from Adam. In a generation intoxicated with power, Enoch sought truth, while others forgot prayer. He listened for heaven's whisper. One day, as he prayed, Uriel appeared in brilliance. The Lord has seen your heart, the angel said. You shall carry his message to those who once had wings. Enoch was taken up through the heavens. He beheld the throne of the Almighty. He saw the abyss where the fallen watchers were bound. When they saw him, they pleaded, "Intercede for us. We were once children of light." Enoch perceived their sorrow, but also the extinguishing of their former glory. "You were born of light," he answered, "yet you used that light to destroy what was holy. I will pray, but understand. Repentance cannot erase what was chosen knowingly." He knelt and lifted his voice. "Lord, have mercy." But the voice of God thundered in reply. They knew good and chose evil. Justice cannot be undone. Their judgment stands written in the fabric of time. Enoch bowed, tears falling upon his hands. In that moment he understood, forgiveness is not the cancellation of justice. It is the opportunity granted to the living to turn and be restored. From then on, Enoch recorded what he had seen, the laws of heaven, the cycles of time, the fall of the watchers, and the coming flood that would cleanse the earth. These writings became known as the Book of Enoch. And one day, as he prayed, the heavens opened once more. A mighty wind encircled him. Light descended like a chariot of fire. And Enoch was no more, for God took him. Moses, standing within his vision upon the mountain, felt the immensity of what he had witnessed. He understood that history was not random, nor were its tragedies without meaning. Every age bore consequence. Every rebellion invited correction. Every mercy testified to a greater design. And time, sacred, measured, and unyielding, moved steadily toward its appointed fulfillment. Enoch was taken from the earth without tasting death, for God brought him into heaven alive. After him came Methuselah, then Lamech, and from Lamech was born a child whose destiny was marked from the moment of his birth. When the child entered the world, light seemed to fill the room, and his eyes shone with an unusual brilliance, as though reflecting the heavens themselves. Lamech trembled at the sight and said to Methuselah that this child was unlike any other, that he carried within him a radiance not of this world. But Methuselah prayed, and the angel of the Lord reassured him that the child was born of Enoch's righteous line. In his days, the waters would rise to cleanse the earth, yet he and his household would be spared. And so the child was named Noah, meaning rest, for through him the world would find renewal after judgment. Noah grew up in a world that had largely forgotten God. Men glorified their own strength, built monuments to themselves, and declared their own names worthy of worship. The strong oppressed the weak, violence was praised as power, and reverence for heaven faded into distant memory. Though the giants had perished, their arrogance remained alive in the hearts of men. Kings proclaimed themselves divine, false prophets demanded blood for blessing, and corruption filled the earth from dawn until dusk. Yet Noah was different. He was quiet in a noisy age, humble where others were proud, faithful where others scoffed. While men trusted in their own might, Noah bowed his head each morning and prayed that his heart would remain clean in a world drowning in sin. As the years passed and corruption deepened, Noah was given a dream unlike any other. He saw the heavens torn open and waters surging from the depths. He heard the cries of nations overwhelmed by a flood beyond imagination. Awakening in fear, he knew the vision was not born of his own thoughts. He fell to his knees and asked the Lord what he must do. In answer, light filled his dwelling, and the angel Uriel appeared, announcing that the earth had defiled itself beyond remedy. A great flood would come not merely to destroy, but to cleanse. Noah was chosen not because of strength or greatness, but because he believed. He was commanded to build an ark, a vessel that would preserve life, so that when judgment had passed, the earth might live again. Though the sky remained clear and the ground parched, Noah began to build. He cut timber, joined beams, and sealed the structure with pitch, working year after year under the scorching sun. Those who passed by mocked him and laughed at the thought of rain, but he did not answer them. He continued in obedience, knowing that faith often stands alone before it is vindicated. When at last the ark stood complete upon the dry earth, something extraordinary occurred. Animals began to emerge from the forests and hills, moving in ordered pairs toward the vessel. Birds gathered in flocks, beasts great and small walked without fear, drawn by a will greater than their own. The people laughed even louder, calling Noah delusional. Yet he understood what they could not. When mankind laughs at heaven, it is often because judgment is nearer than they imagine. "Guard your heart in purity," Noah had once said, "for from your line shall arise the one who will bring salvation to the world." When he finished speaking, the angel inscribed the appointed boundaries into the book of time. Light moved silently across the heavens, tracing unseen lines upon the earth below. The inheritance of the nations was not drawn by ambition, but by divine decree. Yet Ham looked upon the portion given to Shem and saw that it was fair, rich with rivers and fertile plains. Envy stirred within him. He said to his son Canaan, "Your uncle's land is better than ours. Go and take it." And Canaan obeyed. He moved westward and seized the territory appointed to Shem, the land that would one day be called Canaan. When Noah heard of this, sorrow weighed heavily upon him. "Canaan," he declared, "you have taken what was not yours. Therefore your seed shall bear the consequence. The land you seized will know strife, and your descendants shall serve their brothers." It was not merely a curse of anger, but a pronouncement that injustice, once planted, yields conflict for generations. From that time, the three lines of Noah spread across the world. The sons of Japheth moved north and west, settling distant lands. The sons of Ham went southward, founding kingdoms across Africa and beyond. The sons of Shem remained in the Middle Lands, where, in ages to come, the voice of the Lord would again be heard through prophets and covenant. Moses understood that land was not merely soil, it was testimony. The boundaries of nations were drawn not by conquest alone, but under the sovereignty of God. Each people received not only territory, but purpose within the unfolding design of history. Generations passed after the rainbow first arched across the sky. Humanity multiplied once more. Villages became cities, fields flourished, and prosperity returned. Yet as the earth was renewed, the hearts of men grew hollow. The memory of the flood faded into legend, reverence diminished, ambition swelled. In the plain of Shinar, vast and fertile, a unified people gathered. "Let us build a city," they said, "and a tower whose top reaches the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered." What began as cooperation became defiance. Brick by brick, the tower rose, a monument not to gratitude, but to pride. They no longer sought heaven in humility, they sought to ascend by force. The strong exploited the weak, the old were cast aside. The tower was meant to touch heaven, yet its foundation was rooted in arrogance. From above, the Lord beheld their unity without reverence. "If they speak as one," he said, "nothing they imagine will be restrained from them." And so he descended not with floodwaters, but with confusion. Their language fractured, words dissolved into unfamiliar sounds. Commands became misunderstandings. Laughter turned to chaos. The tower stood unfinished, half shrouded in cloud, half buried in dust. The place was called Babel Confusion, for there the speech of humanity was divided. Nations scattered across the earth, each bearing its own tongue and destiny. The unity once shared became fractured, and humanity entered a second fall, not through violence, but through misunderstanding. Yet even in dispersion, God did not abandon mankind. Among the scattered peoples, one lineage preserved the memory of the one who had created heaven and earth, the line of Shem. From Shem came generations who guarded the ancient truth, that God required no idol, no carved image, for all creation was his temple. Through Arphaxad, Shelah, Eber, Peleg, Reu, Serug, Nahor, and finally Terah, the memory endured like a quiet ember. Terah, however, crafted idols for kings. Stone and wood filled his house, yet his son Abraham could not silence the questions within his heart. As a child, he would gaze at the statues and ask, "If these are gods, why must we carry them? Why do they not speak?" When he looked at the sun, he wondered if it were divine, but it set. He considered the moon, but it faded. He studied the stars, but they too vanished at dawn. And he realized that the true Creator must be one who never diminishes. One night, Abraham walked alone beneath the heavens. Gazing at the countless stars, he whispered, "O Maker of all things, if you are real, show yourself to me. I do not wish to bow to stone, but to the one who made both stone and sky." A stillness came upon him, and within that stillness a living voice spoke not with thunder, but with certainty. "Leave your father's house and the land you have known. Go to the place I will show you. I will make of you a great nation, and through you all families of the earth shall be blessed." Abraham fell to the ground in awe. He knew he had encountered the God whom the world had forgotten. At dawn, he gathered his wife Sarai and his nephew Lot. Though others mocked him for following a whisper into the unknown, he departed in faith. Through deserts and valleys, past cities heavy with idols and smoke, Abraham journeyed not because he had seen the destination, but because he trusted the one who had called him. And thus, from a world fractured by pride and confusion, a new covenant began, not built of bricks reaching upward, but of faith rising from the heart. Wherever Abraham journeyed, he raised altars of stone and prayed, declaring that his God had no image, no carved form, for he dwelt in the breath of every living thing. And the Lord looked upon Abraham as he had once looked upon Noah, and before him upon Enoch. In a world darkened by deceit and pride, Abraham kept his heart steadfast. Therefore, God established through him a new covenant that through his seed the light of faith would be restored to mankind. From Adam to Noah, and from Noah to Abraham, there remained an unbroken thread between heaven and earth, the faith of those who still listened for the voice of God within. When Abraham left his homeland and crossed barren wilderness without knowing his destination, he walked not by sight but by trust. Years passed, and though the promise of a son had been given, he remained childless. One night, beneath a sky crowded with stars, he poured out his longing before the Lord. In response, a divine assurance came. His descendants would be as countless as the stars themselves. Abraham believed, and that belief was counted to him as righteousness. Yet faith would be sealed not only by words, but by covenant. At God's command, Abraham prepared the sacrificial animals and laid their divided pieces opposite one another. As darkness fell and a heavy stillness covered the land, a divine presence passed between the offerings in the form of living fire. In that solemn moment, the covenant was established, not ink upon parchment, but promise sealed in sacrifice and flame. Abraham understood that this covenant reached far beyond his lifetime. It was the foundation of a lineage through which blessing would flow to the world. In time, the impossible occurred. Though aged and long past expectation, Sarah conceived and bore a son. They named him Isaac. Laughter, for joy replaced disbelief. Isaac became the living sign that God's word does not fail, that what seems impossible to men remains certain with God. He was not merely a child of old age, but the embodiment of fulfilled promise. Years later, when Isaac had grown, The faith that had carried Abraham through wilderness and waiting was tested in a way beyond comprehension. In the quiet of night, the Lord called him once more and commanded him to offer Isaac as a sacrifice upon Mount Moriah. The words pierced Abraham's heart, yet he did not argue. At dawn he prepared for the journey. For 3 days he walked in silence, carrying both obedience and sorrow within his breast. When they reached the mountain, Isaac noticed the wood and the fire, but asked where the lamb might be. Abraham answered with trembling trust that the Lord himself would provide. Upon the height, he built the altar and laid the wood in place. With shaking hands, he bound his son, yet Isaac did not resist. In that silent moment, father and son stood suspended between promise and obedience, between love and surrender. Abraham lifted the knife, and heaven spoke. "Abraham, Abraham." The voice halted his hand, declaring that his faith had been proven. A ram, caught in a thicket, became the substitute offering, and Isaac was spared. On that mountain, Abraham learned that true faith is not the absence of fear, but obedience despite it. Not blind surrender, but trust in the character of the one who commands. Thus the covenant was affirmed. The God who had promised descendants as numerous as the stars would not contradict his own word. Through Isaac would continue the line of promise, and through that line would come the unfolding story of redemption. Moses, hearing this revelation upon the mountain, understood that faith is not believing when fulfillment is visible. It is believing when everything seen argues against hope. And from Abraham's altar upon Moriah, the pattern was set, that God provides, that obedience refines, and that the covenant of faith stands firm through every generation. "Abraham, Abraham." The voice from heaven stopped his trembling hand. "Do not lay your hand upon the boy. Now I know that you fear God, for you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." At those words, the weight that crushed Abraham's chest broke into tears. He fell to his knees, understanding at last that God had never desired Isaac's death. What the Lord sought was not blood, but trust, loyalty proven in surrender. Lifting his eyes, Abraham saw a ram caught by its horns in a thicket. He offered it in place of his son and named that place Jehovah-Jireh, the Lord will provide. And again the voice declared that because he had obeyed, his descendants would be as countless as the stars and the sand, and through his seed all nations would be blessed. That evening, Abraham and Isaac descended the mountain together in silence, bound not by fear, but by a sacred understanding. Faith had passed through fire and emerged unbroken. From that day, Abraham was called the father of all who believe, not because he gave something up, but because he trusted when every instinct urged him to doubt. When Abraham died, the covenant did not fade. It lived on in Isaac, who taught his sons that blessing does not rest upon strength, but upon faithfulness. Esau, a hunter of the fields, lived for the moment. Jacob, quieter and inward, cherished what was unseen. In a moment of weakness, Esau traded his birthright for a single meal, surrendering what heaven had intended for him. Thus the covenant passed to Jacob, not because he was flawless, but because he valued what others despised. Jacob's life was marked by struggle. Fleeing from his brother's anger, he slept alone in the wilderness and dreamed of a ladder reaching from earth to heaven, with angels ascending and descending upon it. There the Lord reaffirmed the promise given to Abraham. Later, on the eve of reconciliation with Esau, Jacob wrestled through the night with a divine messenger. Refusing to release him without a blessing, he was given a new name, Israel, he who struggles with God. From that struggle was born a nation. Israel fathered 12 sons, and among them Joseph shone with uncommon purity. Gifted with dreams, he stirred jealousy in his brothers and was sold into slavery in Egypt. Betrayed and imprisoned, he might have been forgotten by men, but not by God. Through wisdom and the gift of interpreting dreams, Joseph rose to power under Pharaoh and preserved Egypt during years of famine. When his brothers came seeking food, they bowed before him. Unaware, they fulfilled the very dreams they once despised. Joseph revealed himself with tears and forgiveness, declaring that what they meant for evil, God had turned to good. Thus the family of Israel came to Egypt and dwelled there in peace. Before his death, Israel blessed his sons, prophesying that from them would arise 12 tribes and that the promise to Abraham would endure. Generations passed. Joseph died. A new Pharaoh arose who did not remember him. Seeing the Hebrews multiply, he feared their strength. Fear hardened into oppression. The people who had once been honored became slaves, forced to build cities under the scorching sun. Their backs bent beneath labor, and their cries rose like dust into the sky. Yet in whispers at night, parents told their children of the covenant made with Abraham, of Isaac spared upon the mountain, of Jacob renamed Israel, of Joseph raised from prison to palace. The Lord has not forgotten, they would say, though hope grew faint. Then came a cruel decree. Every newborn Hebrew son was to be cast into the Nile. The river that sustained Egypt became a river of sorrow. Mothers wept, the waters carried innocence away. But even then, heaven was not silent. Among the tribe of Levi, a woman bore a son. She hid him for 3 months, sheltering him in shadows while soldiers searched the streets. When she could hide him no longer, she wove a basket of reeds, sealed it with pitch, and placed the child upon the river, whispering a prayer that echoed the faith of her ancestors. Lord, if you still remember your promise, remember this child. The basket drifted through reeds and sunlight until it came to rest, where Pharaoh's daughter bathed. Opening it, she heard the infant's cry, and compassion stirred within her. She named him Moses, drawn out, for he had been drawn from the water. Raised in Pharaoh's palace, trained in the wisdom of Egypt, he grew amid wealth and power. Yet within him burned the memory of his people's suffering. The Lord had placed him there for a purpose. For while Israel labored in chains and believed the promise forgotten, in the heart of the empire itself, a deliverer was being prepared. The child saved from the river would one day stand before Pharaoh without fear. The one drawn from the waters would lead a nation through them. Thus the covenant moved forward not through comfort, but through trial, not through visible strength, but through unseen design. And every tear shed in bondage was recorded in the book of time, awaiting the hour when deliverance would rise. When the child could no longer be hidden, his mother rose before sunrise and gathered reeds from the riverbank. With trembling hands, she wove a small basket and sealed it with tar so that no water could seep through. She laid her son inside, covered him gently with linen, and carried him to the edge of the Nile. Pressing her lips to his forehead, she whispered that though she could not keep him, the Lord would. Then she released the basket into the current and watched as it drifted away, her tears falling into the sand. But the river that had become a place of death became, for this child, a path of destiny. The basket floated unharmed until it reached the place where Pharaoh's daughter came to bathe. Seeing it among the reeds, she ordered it brought to her. When she opened it and heard the infant cry, compassion stirred within her. She knew he was a Hebrew child, yet mercy overcame decree. She chose to raise him as her own. In a quiet turn of providence, the child's sister, who had followed at a distance, offered to find a Hebrew nurse, thus returning the boy, for a season, to his own mother's arms. He was named Moses, drawn out, for he had been drawn from the waters. He grew up between 2 worlds, born among slaves yet educated in the courts of kings. Surrounded by wealth and wisdom, he nevertheless felt the pain of his people as if it were his own. The fire of injustice burned within him long before he understood his calling. Years later, after fleeing Egypt and settling in Midian, Moses believed his life would pass quietly among flocks and desert winds. Yet the question within him never died. One morning near Mount Horeb, he saw a bush engulfed in flame that did not consume its branches. As he drew near in wonder, a voice called his name from the fire and commanded him to remove his sandals, for he stood on holy ground. The voice declared itself to be the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God who had seen Israel's suffering and had come down to deliver them. Moses trembled at the charge laid upon him. He was to return to Egypt and stand before Pharaoh. When he asked what name he should declare, the answer resounded from the flame, "I am who I am." Thus the shepherd became the messenger of the Eternal. The staff in his hand, once a tool of pasture, became a sign of divine authority, And when he stood before Pharaoh in the vast halls of Egypt and commanded him to release the people of Israel, the king responded with pride and scorn. He asked who this Lord might be, as though heaven required recognition from a throne of gold. That very defiance opened the door to judgment. The Nile, pride of Egypt, turned to blood at the raising of Moses' staff. The river that sustained life became a source of horror. Fish died, wells yielded red water, and the land recoiled at the stench. Frogs followed, swarming into homes and temples until the nation groaned beneath their numbers. Then gnats rose from the dust itself, tormenting man and beast alike, and even Egypt's magicians confessed a power beyond their own. Swarms of flies darkened the sky, yet the land of the Israelites remained untouched, a silent testimony that this was no natural calamity. Still, Pharaoh's heart hardened. Livestock perished in the fields, striking at Egypt's wealth and strength. Each plague dismantled a pillar of Egyptian pride, revealing that the power Pharaoh claimed for himself was fragile before the will of the living God. And so the struggle between throne and covenant unfolded not as a contest of armies, but as a revelation that no empire, however mighty, stands above the one who remembers his promise. The fifth plague spread like a silent shadow across Egypt's strength. Horses, donkeys, camels, sheep and cattle collapsed in the fields as though struck by an invisible hand. Their bodies lay scattered across the plains, and the stench of death drifted as far as Memphis. Shepherds wept beside lifeless herds, while flies swarmed under a merciless sun. Yet in the land of Goshen, the livestock of Israel remained untouched. Fear began to settle over Egypt, but Pharaoh clutched his throne tighter, concealing the doubt that had begun to stir within him. Then came the sixth plague. Moses cast ashes from a furnace into the air, and wherever they fell, painful boils broke out upon the skin of man and beast. The streets filled with cries of agony. Even Pharaoh's magicians, once so proud, could no longer stand before Moses. Still the king hardened his heart. The seventh plague descended with terrifying majesty. The sky darkened to a deep violet, thunder roared, and hail mingled with fire fell from heaven. Crops were crushed, trees splintered, animals perished, and the land that had once flourished beneath the Nile lay shattered beneath ash. Yet Pharaoh's pride endured. The eighth plague followed swiftly. An east wind carried locusts in numbers beyond counting. They devoured what little remained, every leaf, every stalk, every trace of green. Egypt, once radiant and fertile, became a barren wasteland. The people begged for release, but Pharaoh refused. Then came the ninth plague, darkness. Not the fading of day into night, but a heavy, suffocating blackness that lasted 3 days. It was a darkness that could be felt, pressing upon the skin and spirit alike. Egypt sat paralyzed in silence, while in Goshen there was light. The contrast spoke louder than thunder. Finally came the 10th plague, the most grievous of all. In the stillness of midnight, a cry rose across Egypt. From palace to hut, the firstborn in every household fell lifeless. Grief swept through the land like a storm of sorrow. Pharaoh, broken and defeated, summoned Moses and commanded the Israelites to depart. At dawn, the people of Israel left in solemn haste. They carried unleavened bread, their children, and their memories of bondage. There was no triumphant music, only quiet footsteps fading into the desert air. Freedom had come, but it was fragile and uncertain. Soon they reached the shores of the sea, its waters vast and impassable before them. Behind them thundered Pharaoh's chariots, racing in pursuit. Fear surged among the people. Some cried out in despair, wishing for the familiarity of slavery over the uncertainty of deliverance. Moses stood firm, lifting his staff toward heaven. Through the night, a mighty wind blew. The waters rose and parted, forming walls on either side, revealing a path of dry ground beneath the moonlight. In awe and trembling faith, the Israelites walked forward between the towering waters. Behind them, the Egyptian army entered the seabed, but their chariot wheels faltered. When the last Israelite reached the far shore, the waters crashed down, swallowing the pursuing forces. By morning, the sea lay calm, as though it had never been divided. On the opposite shore, The people fell to their knees. They knew they had not been saved by strength or strategy, but by divine mercy. A nation of slaves had become a nation of the free, not through power, but through faith. Yet freedom did not end their testing. Beyond the sea lay a desert of endless sand and burning sun. At first, they sang songs of victory, but hunger and thirst soon replaced celebration. Murmurs of complaint rose against Moses. In their desperation, they longed for the food and water of Egypt, forgetting the chains that had accompanied it. In response to their cries, a pillar of cloud appeared by day, shielding them from the sun, and a pillar of fire by night, lighting their path. When thirst threatened their lives, Moses struck a rock at God's command, and water flowed forth in abundance. When hunger consumed them, manna would soon fall from heaven, provision for each day, teaching them dependence rather than fear. Thus, the journey through the wilderness became more than a passage through sand. It became a shaping of hearts. Miracles had opened the sea, but faith would be forged in the desert. When dawn broke over the wilderness, the ground was covered with delicate white flakes, fine as frost. The people stared in wonder as Moses told them this was manna, the bread of heaven. They were instructed to gather only what they needed for each day, a daily lesson in trust. Yet some, driven by fear or greed, hoarded more than they required. By morning it had spoiled and filled their tents with stench. Moses looked upon them with sorrow and reminded them that the Lord was not teaching them survival by excess, but faith by dependence. Day after day, manna descended, and the pillar of cloud by day and fire by night guided them. Slowly, they began to understand that freedom was not the absence of restraint, but the presence of obedience. Still, the wilderness tested them. Weariness bred complaint, and doubt resurfaced like heat shimmering over sand. One night Moses sat alone beneath the stars and confessed his burden before God. The answer came gently. He was not alone, and the journey to the promised land belonged not to the strong, but to the faithful. So he rose each day and walked forward, staff in hand, leading a people who were learning that deliverance was not merely escape from Egypt, but transformation of the heart. After 40 years, when the desert had erased their footprints and a new generation stood ready, they encamped at the foot of Mount Sinai. The mountain towered into the clouds, wrapped in smoke and fire, a meeting place between heaven and earth. Moses ascended alone, no longer trembling as he once had. He had seen seas part and water flow from stone. He now understood that miracles pointed beyond themselves to the one who performed them. On the mountain, thunder rolled and light enveloped him. There he received not only the law, but the revelation that time itself moved within sacred order. History was not chaos, but covenant, an unfolding story in which sin, judgment, mercy, and renewal formed repeating cycles under divine sovereignty. The Lord had not merely created the world. He had ordered its ages so that humanity might find its way back to him. At the summit, the law was given. Amid smoke and lightning, words were inscribed upon stone commandments, not to bind a people in chains, but to guard their freedom from corruption. They were called to worship no other gods, to reject idols, to honor the sacredness of God's name and the Sabbath, to respect parents, and to uphold life, faithfulness, truth, and contentment. The covenant was written in fire upon stone, a moral foundation for generations. Yet while Moses remained on the mountain, the people below grew impatient. Fear turned into folly, and they shaped a golden calf from their jewelry, proclaiming it the God who had delivered them. When Moses descended and saw their revelry, grief and anger overwhelmed him. He shattered the tablets, symbol of a covenant broken by unfaithful hearts. Still, instead of abandoning them, he interceded. He pleaded that God's mercy outweigh their weakness. And mercy prevailed. The covenant was written again, not only on stone, but as a renewed invitation to obedience. When Moses returned from the mountain, his face shone with reflected glory. The people understood that the law was not a burden but a safeguard, a bridge to keep them from losing their way as they had in Egypt and at the sea. Thus, at Sinai, the journey of faith reached a turning point. The God who had parted waters now established a covenant to guide hearts. The first chapters of Israel's story were sealed not by conquest or wealth, but by mercy, repentance, and the enduring promise that heaven had not abandoned earth. High upon the summit of Mount Sinai, while cloud and fire still wrapped the mountain in trembling light, Moses remained kneeling in silence. He believed that the revelation had reached its fullness when the law was given, when the covenant had been carved into stone by the hand of God. Yet the angel who stood beside him, radiant yet solemn, spoke again and said that what he had received was only part of the story. The law had been given to guide mankind, but now he would be shown how the Lord ordered the world itself after the great flood, how heaven divided the earth and appointed its nations according to divine wisdom. As the angel lifted his hand, the thunder softened and another vision unfolded before Moses. He saw the waters of judgment receding from the face of the earth. Mountains rose from the deep like ancient bones emerging from the sea, and the ark of Noah rested upon the heights of Ararat. The world was silent, washed clean yet empty, waiting for footsteps. Noah and his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, stepped out into that vast stillness as the beginning of humanity once more. They built an altar and offered sacrifice, not in triumph, but in gratitude. They understood that they stood alive not by strength, but by mercy. The angel explained that from that moment forward, the Lord divided the earth among the sons of Noah, so that order might prevail where chaos had once threatened to reign. To Shem were given the central lands, the territories stretching through the heart of the world, lands that would one day cradle covenant and prophecy. To Japheth were assigned the northern regions, distant coastlands, and rugged mountains reaching toward the cold horizons. To Ham were given the southern territories, sun-scorched plains and fertile valleys alike, lands of great testing and great power. The division was not an act of favoritism, nor of fragmentation, but of preservation. Since the fall of mankind and the confusion of tongues at Babel, unity without humility had proven dangerous. The Lord, in his wisdom, separated the peoples, so that pride would not again unite them in rebellion. From these 3 branches emerged what tradition calls the 72 nations, distinct peoples, languages, and cultures spreading like lights across the earth. Moses saw them in the vision as glowing embers scattered upon a vast landscape, each carrying its own hue and intensity. Some shone brightly in justice and compassion, others flickered weakly under the shadow of arrogance. The angel revealed that the Most High appointed a heavenly guardian over each nation, not as a rival to God's sovereignty, but as a steward beneath it, charged with guiding and restraining according to divine order. Heaven had not abandoned the earth, it had structured it. Yet among all the nations, one portion the Lord kept for himself. Israel was not entrusted to a heavenly intermediary in the same way as the others. Israel was reserved directly as the Lord's inheritance. This, the angel explained, was not favoritism, but purpose. The Lord chose one people to guard the knowledge of his name, when the rest of the world might forget. When other nations would drift into idolatry or pride, there would remain at least one people through whom the memory of covenant endured. The chosen status of Israel was not a badge of superiority, but a responsibility of preservation, faith kept alive so that the world would never be without witness. The angel then pointed to the heavens, and Moses saw stars moving in perfect circles, each representing a nation turning within its appointed course. They did not wander aimlessly. They moved within boundaries set from the beginning. In their midst shone one steady star, constant and unwavering. It did not outshine the others in brilliance for its own glory, but because it was anchored firmly in the hand of God. Moses understood that borders, languages, and cultures were not accidents of history. They were threads, woven into a design meant to prevent humanity from destroying itself in unified arrogance once again. But as the vision continued, its tone darkened. The angel's expression grew heavy with sorrow. He warned that there would come a second fall, not of waters, but of hearts. The nations would grow strong and forget who had granted them strength. Kings would declare themselves divine. Idols of gold and bronze would rise where gratitude once dwelled. Some of the heavenly guardians would remain faithful to their charge, but others would accept the worship of men and fall through pride. Power would tempt both earth and heaven alike. Before Moses' eyes, cities rose in splendor yet hollow in spirit. Towers pierced the clouds, flags crowned mountains, and armies marched in the name of glory. The name of God would be invoked to justify cruelty. Justice would be twisted into ambition. Knowledge would increase, yet wisdom would decline. The earth seemed to groan under the weight of violence and self-exaltation. The watchers once cast down would whisper again through temptation, persuading mankind that it no longer needed its creator. And when humanity believed that lie, it would forge its own chains. Moses trembled and asked whether darkness would prevail again. The angel answered that the Lord allows mankind to taste the fruit of its pride, not to destroy it, but to awaken it. Only when arrogance reveals its emptiness do hearts rediscover humility. Only when light seems nearly extinguished do souls begin to long for dawn. Judgment, the angel implied, is not merely punishment, it is correction within a larger design. As the light of the vision began to fade, Moses understood that what he had been shown was not simply geography or ancient history. It was a map of the human condition. Every nation shares one origin, every language traces back to one breath, every era turns within a single divine order. The 72 nations were not scattered at random, they were positioned with intention. Heaven had divided the earth so that humanity might survive its own ambition, and through covenant, it would one day gather humanity again. Kneeling upon the mountain, Moses began to write. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of revelation. He recorded that no border is accidental, no people without purpose, no century outside the will of God. Time itself is not a blind river carrying civilizations toward oblivion. It is a narrative authored from the beginning. And though nations rise and fall, though they forget and remember in cycles of pride and repentance, the design remains steady. In the end, the angel made clear, all nations would answer not to their own strength, nor to the guardians appointed over them, but to the one who divided the earth and ordered the ages. The same Lord who scattered humanity for its preservation would, in his appointed time, gather it again, not through conquest, but through covenant fulfilled. And Moses understood that history was not a story of chaos, but of patience, divine patience, guiding mankind back, age after age, toward the one who formed them from the beginning. Tears gathered in Moses' eyes as the weight of the revelation pressed upon him. His voice trembled in the stillness of the mountain air as he asked the question that had formed in the depths of his heart. What, then, of the covenant? Will mankind ever truly be saved? The angel's presence, which moments before had shone with overwhelming brilliance, softened like a breeze moving gently across cool desert sand. His voice no longer thundered. It carried the quiet assurance of something eternal and unshakable. There is still hope, the angel said. For the Lord does not abandon what he has made. When sin rises to its fullest measure, when the nations drown in the darkness of their own pride, when men worship themselves and call their own wisdom divine, the Lord will send one man, not a king robed in splendor, not a warrior bearing steel, but a bearer of mercy. He will come quietly, born among the humble, cradled not in gold but in poverty. The world will not recognize him, yet his words will shake the heavens. Through him, love will be remembered, and the covenant will be renewed, not carved upon stone, but written upon the living hearts of men. The wind surged around them, and the light flickered like a flame stirred by unseen breath. Moses fell to his knees, his tears mingling with the dust of the holy ground. He did not yet understand how such a thing could be, how one life could carry the weight of many. But deep within his spirit he knew this truth. No matter how often humanity fell, the mercy of God would always be greater than its sin. The angel spoke again, his voice resonant like a bell echoing across eternity. Write these words, Moses. When mankind believes it has replaced its creator, remind them that even their breath is borrowed. When the world sinks into chaos and men declare heaven silent, let them know that the Lord is still there, waiting for his children to return. Then the light began to fade, leaving Moses alone beneath the vast sky. He looked down from the sacred mountain toward the fragile world below, unaware of how near it always stood to both ruin and redemption. And he began to write line by line so that when generations forgot heaven, the record would remain, testifying that history itself rests in the hand of God. Yet the revelation did not end there. As the clouds dimmed to a soft glow and the winds quieted, the angel's radiance shifted from gold to a pure white brilliance, gentle as dawn. You have seen creation, the fall, the flood, the covenant, and the division of nations, he said. Now hear what was ordained before the foundations of the world. There will come a Redeemer. Moses lifted his gaze, awe and trembling mingling within him. A Redeemer? He asked. Another chosen to deliver humanity? Yes, the angel replied. When sin covers the earth like a shadow at noon, when innocent blood cries from the ground and nations exalt themselves as gods, the Lord will send one from the line of Abraham, from the root of David. He will not come adorned with riches, but born among straw and the breath of beasts. He will carry no sword, only truth. He will wear no crown of gold, but a crown of suffering. Yet when he speaks, heaven and earth will listen. Before Moses' eyes appeared fleeting visions, a humble man walking among the sick and broken, touching lepers without fear, lifting children into his arms, speaking of the love of God, not as distant law but as living mercy. He would be rejected, the angel said softly, because light is not welcomed in darkness. The proud would condemn him, the powerful would silence him, and he would be slain by those he came to save. Yet death would not hold him. On the third day, while heaven seemed silent and hope buried, the earth itself would tremble, stone would break, and he would rise, opening the gate of forgiveness for all nations. Moses' tears flowed freely. One man will bear the sins of many. Who could endure such a burden? The angel's gaze was tender yet firm. None but he who comes from God himself. He will be the living word, the covenant made flesh, the bridge between heaven and earth. When he speaks, it will be the Creator calling his children home. Will the world recognize him? Moses whispered. Some will, the angel answered, and they will be saved. Others will turn away, clinging to pride. Yet love will triumph in the end, for nothing is stronger than the mercy of the Lord. As these words settled upon the mountain, the sky above Sinai seemed nearer than ever before. Stars burned bright and close, and a distant melody, solemn and warm, carried upon the wind. When the appointed hour comes, the angel said, a star will rise as a sign. Those who follow its light will know the new covenant has begun. Moses pressed his hands into the earth, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he had heard. He realized he was receiving a promise meant not only for his own generation, but for ages yet unborn. Let me remember every word, he prayed. Let me write faithfully, so that none may say they were forgotten. The angel placed a radiant hand upon his shoulder. When the world despairs, they must know redemption was promised from the beginning. When they believe heaven is silent, remind them the Redeemer was already foreseen. Then the light faded into the clouds, and the mountain fell quiet once more. But the fire within Moses' heart did not fade. He knew that in some distant age, the promise spoken upon Sinai would be fulfilled among men. At last came the sealing of the mysteries. The wind shifted again, no longer roaring with divine intensity, but drifting gently like a farewell. Moses sensed the encounter drawing to its close, though questions still stirred within him. When I write these things, he asked, will mankind have faith enough to understand? The angel's reply was steady and compassionate. Not all will understand, not all will believe, but in every generation the Lord will preserve a remnant humble souls who listen amid the noise. They will read, they will remember, and they will pass it on. Then, before Moses appeared a great book of light, radiant as crystal, its pages alive with letters of fire flowing like living streams. This is the book of time, the angel said, where all things past, present, and yet to come are written. Yet not all may be revealed. Some mysteries are kept for the appointed hour. The symbols flared brilliantly, then slowly began to close. A single flash of pure light filled the air, followed by a deep, resonant sound, like a celestial door sealing shut. The book vanished, leaving only stillness. "Why must it be sealed?" Moses asked softly. "Should not all truth be given freely?" "Truth is for the humble," the angel answered. "If man possessed all knowledge while pride still ruled his heart, he would use it to destroy rather than to heal. So the Lord conceals part of time, not to deny, but to protect. When the final hour comes, the book will be opened again, and every soul will see that nothing escaped. His will, not life, not sorrow, not joy. All has been held in his hands." Moses bowed low. "I will write," he said, "and I will wait." The angel smiled, a rare, luminous smile granted to mortal sight only once. "From this day forward, you are not only shepherd of Israel, but keeper of memory, guardian of heaven's testimony for mankind." Then the mountain blazed with a final burst of light. For a moment, Moses saw the heavens opened and hosts of angels moving in radiant harmony, singing a wordless song woven from eternity itself. When the brilliance faded, he stood alone upon the peak, scroll in hand, the dawn rising warm and golden across the horizon. Time had been sealed, yet the story was not finished. For in every generation thereafter, in every heart still open to heaven, another page would unfold, not written in ink, but in faith, mercy, and the longing to return to the Lord. He knew, as he descended from the mountain, that no one on earth would ever fully believe what had just taken place. He had seen what no prophet before him had seen: the book of time suspended in living light, the prophecy of a Redeemer spoken before the ages, and the sealing of history itself within the will of God. He had witnessed heaven close its mysteries like a scroll and entrust the unfolding of centuries to the fragile hands of mankind. When dawn broke over the wilderness, Moses rose to his feet, changed forever. The radiance upon his face was not merely reflected light, it was the lingering imprint of divine presence. Even the wind seemed to slow around him, as if creation itself recognized that he carried something sacred back into the world. With each step down Mount Sinai, the stones beneath his feet seemed to whisper like a prayer. At the foot of the mountain, the people of Israel waited in anxious silence. When they saw him emerging through the mist, they trembled. Some shielded their eyes, others fell to their knees, for his face shone as though wrapped in fire. Yet it was not a consuming fire. It was a holy light, gentle yet unearthly, the mark of heaven resting upon mortal flesh. In his hands he carried the tablets of the law, the visible sign of covenant. But within his heart he carried words that could not yet be spoken, truths appointed for generations still unborn. The people gathered around him and asked what he had seen. Moses did not speak of the book of time or the sealed mysteries. He did not describe the prophecy of the coming Redeemer. Instead, he answered simply, "I heard the voice of the Lord." And then he told them what they were ready to hear: that mankind was not yet prepared to know everything, but that when their hearts learned to love, they would understand. He placed the tablets before them and declared the covenant, reminding them that obedience was not bondage, but alignment with divine order. And he added, quietly but firmly, that one day the covenant would be completed, not written upon stone, but inscribed upon human hearts. For a moment he looked back toward the mountain. The clouds had lifted, yet he knew heaven had not withdrawn. It remained silent, patient, watching. And so Moses walked forward, carrying that light into the world of men, beginning a long journey of faith and waiting that would stretch across centuries. As the years passed, however, memory faded. The desert winds erased his footprints. Mount Sinai stood silent once more, indistinguishable from other peaks beneath the sun. The people still spoke of God, still recited commandments, still built altars and offered prayers. But gradually reverence turned into ritual, and ritual into habit. They spoke to God, yet rarely listened. As before, humanity drifted. Pride crept back into hearts. Fear shaped decisions. Desire replaced devotion. And darkness, subtle at first, returned. Yet heaven did not withdraw. The angels watched wars unfold, witnessed lies multiply, and saw compassion grow thin. Still, in every generation, there remained a remnant quiet souls who chose kindness when cruelty prevailed, who prayed when others mocked, who kept faith alive in ordinary acts of love. Because of them, the light never vanished completely. God no longer sent floods or thunder to awaken mankind. Instead, he waited. And in the silence, those who truly listened could still hear a whisper, "I am still here. You have wandered, but I have not left." The covenant, though neglected, was not broken beyond repair. It was covered like a lamp hidden beneath dust. Pride, hatred, and fear obscured it, but a single sincere prayer could lift that dust. The angel had once told Moses that when mankind grew weary of its own darkness, it would look up again. The renewal would not come through spectacle alone, but through awakened hearts. As time moved forward, another layer of mystery quietly receded from common memory. Most remembered Moses as the giver of the 10 Commandments, the lawgiver of Israel. Few knew that upon Sinai he had received more than tablets of stone. Alongside the law, he had been shown the cycles of time, the ordered rhythm of history, and the hidden structure behind nations and ages. This revelation would later be associated with what became known as the Book of Jubilees, a text that framed history not merely as a sequence of events, but as divinely appointed intervals. In that tradition, history was divided into sacred cycles of 49 years, Jubilees, reflecting a heavenly rhythm underlying earthly time. Creation, covenant, judgment, restoration, each unfolded not randomly, but within measured design. It spoke of angelic guardians assigned to nations, of heavenly order intertwined with human choice, of rebellion among watchers who abandoned their charge. It portrayed history as structured, purposeful, and governed beyond visible power. Such ideas were profound and controversial. Over centuries, as religious authority became increasingly centralized, not every text circulated equally. Communities discerned which writings were to be preserved as universally authoritative scripture and which would remain outside the formal canon. The Book of Jubilees endured in certain traditions, most notably preserved within Ethiopian Christianity, while in other regions it gradually fell out of common use. Its disappearance from broader circulation was not the result of a single dramatic decree, but of long processes of transmission, translation, and theological debate. Why did it unsettle some? Because it emphasized divine sovereignty over time itself. If history unfolds according to God's appointed cycles, then no empire, no priesthood, no institution ultimately commands the narrative. It also presented a vivid cosmology, angels assigned to nations, watchers who fell, heavenly structures intersecting earthly affairs. Such themes invited reflection on the relationship between divine order and human responsibility. In eras when political and religious systems intertwined closely, any text suggesting limits to earthly authority could be perceived as destabilizing. It also carried a sobering message that after the flood, nations gradually shifted from honoring the Creator to revering created beings. Guardians meant to guide were elevated into objects of worship. Power, once again, replaced humility. That theme, humanity's tendency to mistake the messenger for the source, echoed across history and struck at the heart of empires that deified rulers or celestial symbols. Yet whether read widely or preserved quietly, the deeper message remained consistent with what Moses had carried down the mountain. Time belongs to God. Nations rise and fall within his design. Covenants may be forgotten, but they are not erased. Redemption is not improvised, it is promised. And so the story returns to the mountain. Moses descended radiant, bearing law in his hands and prophecy in his heart. Generations would remember the commandments, debate the texts, question the mysteries. Some would dismiss the unseen, others would seek it fervently. But beneath every cycle of forgetting and remembering, one truth endured. Heaven had spoken. History was not abandoned to chaos. And even when humanity attempted to bury parts of its own sacred memory, the light remained preserved in fragments, in faithful communities, in quiet monasteries, in whispered traditions, and above all, in hearts still willing to listen. For if humanity still knows how to pray, God is still listening. If even a few still choose love over pride, the covenant has not been lost. The world changes. Empires rise and crumble. Texts are copied, debated, sometimes neglected. But the one who ordered time from the beginning does not change. He waits patient, constant, until mankind remembers that it has always been loved. The fourth reason the Book of Jubilees unsettled so many gatekeepers of tradition is that it speaks in the language of prophecy, hinting at a Redeemer long before the New Testament era. In the dramatic telling, the angel's words to Moses feel startlingly familiar. A man will come from the line of Abraham, carrying not a sword but truth, not abolishing the law but fulfilling it. In tone and theme, that sounds like the very shape of the gospel story. Later Christians would recognize in Jesus mercy instead of conquest, righteousness instead of domination, a covenant that moves from stone tablets into the human heart. And that resemblance in the narrative you're working with is exactly what creates tension. If such a prophecy were accepted as authoritative scripture, it could be read as proof that the hope of a Messiah was articulated outside the later Christian canon, not as something owned by any one institution, era, or ruling class. In other words, the prophecy doesn't merely point forward, it challenges who gets to claim the right to interpret the forward-pointing hope. The fifth reason is even more explosive. Jubilees frames truth as something no empire can monopolize. The book ends with an unsettling idea that there are mysteries humanity is not yet ready to carry, but when the appointed time arrives, heaven's secrets will be revealed. In that message, truth is not the property of a crown, a temple, a council, or a library. Truth belongs to God, and it becomes clear to those whose hearts remain receptive, humble, and attentive. For any system built on controlling access, controlling texts, doctrines, interpretations, or even fear, that idea is dangerous. Because it implies that authority cannot permanently seal heaven behind human gates. It implies that the final word is not institutional power, but awakened conscience and living faith. From there, the narration naturally pivots into a comparison. Jubilees versus Genesis, two perspectives on the same beginning. People often assume Jubilees contradicts Scripture because it includes details Genesis doesn't emphasize. But in the style of this story, Jubilees is presented less as a rival and more as an expanded retelling Genesis as the human-facing account of creation and early history, Jubilees as the angelic commentary given to Moses, a heavenly lens that claims to reveal the design behind events. The first difference is perspective. Genesis reads like sacred history, majestic, direct, and foundational, telling what happened. Creation in 7 days, the forming of humanity, the entrance of sin, the flood, the beginnings of nations. Jubilees, by contrast, is framed as revelation, a guided narration delivered to Moses, day by day, cycle by cycle, as if history itself is being annotated by a celestial scribe. It doesn't only recount the events, it explains their placement, their rhythm, their why, and how angels function as witnesses and stewards within creation's order. The second difference is emphasis. Genesis highlights the act of creation. Jubilees highlights the architecture of creation. Genesis shows God speaking light into being, separating waters, raising land, forming life. Jubilees, in this telling, insists that nothing is random, not even the timing. History is structured into sacred intervals, measured not by human convenience, but by heaven's clock. The book's signature idea is the Jubilee cycle, 49-year rhythms, 7 times 7, that are portrayed as the heartbeat of time itself. Where Genesis gives the foundation, Jubilees tries to reveal the blueprint, how seasons, ages, and covenants unfold in patterns, and how time functions as a moral and spiritual order, not merely a sequence of days. The third difference is how sin is interpreted. Genesis presents the fall plainly. Adam and Eve disobey, shame enters, exile follows. Jubilees, as your text frames it, leans into the inner mechanics, sin as a test of loyalty within freedom, rebellion as a choice that ripples across generations. It is less interested in shocking the reader with failure than in teaching the reader what failure means, why the human heart bends, how temptation works, and why mercy remains possible even after collapse. The fourth difference is the role of angels. In Genesis, angels appear when needed, messengers, protectors, strangers, who arrive with divine purpose. In Jubilees, angels become part of the ongoing structure, keepers of time, guardians of nations, recorders of ages, scribes who ensure that no generation disappears unremembered. This widens the stage from earth alone to a layered cosmos where heaven and earth move together, and where history is not merely human politics but spiritual consequence written into the fabric of time. The fifth difference is what the two books aim to produce in the reader. Genesis calls for faith, trust in God's word, obedience, awe. Jubilees, in your narrative, calls for understanding faith that isn't blind but awake, faith that recognizes hardship and delay as part of a larger design. Genesis is the path, Jubilees is the map. Genesis is the proclamation, Jubilees is the commentary. Both, in this style of storytelling, arrive at the same center. God is the creator, time is his domain, and history is an unfolding witness to mercy. And that is why, in the dramatic framing you're using, the Book of Jubilees becomes more than a manuscript. It becomes a reminder that everything has an appointed time, that no moment is wasted, and that the human heart, across centuries, still longs for the same thing Moses longed for on the mountain, to hear God in the silence. Even now, when the modern world is louder and faster than any ancient empire, the ache remains familiar. Fear, doubt, restlessness, and the hunger to believe that life is not chaos but meaning. So the story closes not with argument, but with invitation. To become still, to listen beneath the noise, to let faith be less like panic and more like trust. Because if time truly is a book, then every day is a line being written. And if heaven truly watches, then no act of kindness is ever small, no sincere prayer ever disappears, and no soul is ever forgotten, only waiting for the dust of pride and fear to lift, so the light that has been there all along can finally be seen. Heavenly Father, as the world grows quiet and the stars awaken above, I place my heart into your hands. Thank you for this day, for its lessons, its burdens, and its quiet moments of grace. If I have spoken in anger, forgive me. If I have doubted, strengthen me. If I have forgotten you, remind me that you have never forgotten me. Let your peace stand guard over my thoughts as I rest. Let your mercy wash away the noise, the pressure, and the distractions that cling to my mind. Let your spirit renew my soul before dawn returns. Teach me to trust your timing, to believe that every breath I take is already known to you, and that every pause in my day is an invitation to hear your voice. Tonight, I surrender my fears, my worries, and my regrets. I release what I cannot control and place it in your care. May your angels stand watch beside me. May your light guide my dreams and quiet every anxious thought. And when morning comes, let me rise with a heart ready to love, ready to forgive, and ready to walk in your truth. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Heavenly Father, as the first light of morning breaks through the silence, I open my eyes to the gift of a new day you have made. The night has passed, and I rise by your mercy breathing, sustained and held by the grace that never sleeps. Before the noise begins, before my mind rushes ahead to responsibilities and concerns, I pause in stillness to give this day back to you. It is not mine to control. It belongs to you, the giver of breath, the keeper of time, the one who knows every step I will take. Thank you for watching over me while I slept, for protecting what I could not protect myself, for whispering peace into restless thoughts. As I begin this day, fill me with quiet confidence that your presence goes before me. Cleanse my heart, wash away the weight of yesterday, the doubts, the impatience, the careless words. Make my heart new, as fresh as the sunlight touching the earth for the first time. Guide my hands to do what is right. Guide my words to speak kindness and truth. Guide my eyes to see others not as obstacles, but as souls deeply loved by you. When challenges come, teach me to respond not with fear, but with faith, trusting that you are already present in every storm. Let this day be an offering not of perfection, but of surrender. Whatever I achieve, may it glorify you. Whatever I lose, may it teach me trust. In work and rest, in conversation and silence, remind me that you are near, as close as the air I breathe, as steady as the heartbeat you gave me. Bless the people I will encounter today. Bless the words I will hear and the words I will speak. Even in moments of waiting or frustration, help me remember that every moment is sacred when it begins with you. When night returns, let me look back and see not only my shortcomings, but the traces of your mercy woven through every hour. Thank you for life, for light, and for another chance to walk with you. May every breath be a prayer. May every step remind me that I am yours now and forever. In Jesus' holy name I pray. Amen.